plus week 5. And now without further ado, I invite Dr. Alizaman to start his lecture. Inshallah.
Okay, let me see. Because I'm also starting. Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay, I'm so sorry. I don't know what is going on with my because my system has been confused due to things now. Okay, so now,
Dr. Ali, could you open your video?
Okay, let me open.
Yeah, we can see your face.
It's now. Hold on. Okay. Okay. A'udzubillahi minasyaitonirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We have few questions before set by asked by our participant, but we will address those questions and later on we will answer them if we have enough time. Now, are you sharing with the PowerPoint? Oh, no need to share the PowerPoint. Now, the topic that I'm going to discuss today, inshallah, we are late for 15 minutes, is about Islamic worldview, definition, characteristics. Now, the purpose of today's lecture is to provide a concise view about the concept, the principles of Islamic worldview, and its relevance in our life, in our culture and civilization. Our humble reflection on the concept of Islamic Weltanschauung provides us a panoramic view about Tawhidic approaches and methodology in understanding reality, the truth, from the perspective of the Quran, from the perspective of the Sunnah, and other sources that preserve the universal truth. Now, the history had shown quite vividly how Islamic epochs of Islam had made Islamic intellectual tradition, way of perceiving, way of thinking, way of knowing and doing unique and distinctive doing and become how it becomes unique and distinctive in comparison with the worldviews of Islam. Okay, you go back to the topic, the title. You go back to the title. Okay, down. Okay, that's the point. Okay, later on I'll just tell you when to push. Okay, now putting the issue, I'm talking about the history, how the history have shown us the uniqueness of Islamic worldview. Now, putting the issue of duality, for example, the spirit, the matter, into the right perspective, Islamic Weltanschauung has been so influential in shaping the way of individual, the family, the community, the nation, and the entire culture, and how they conceptualize reality. It was through the established Islamic knowledge system that shaped human consciousness and its primary interpretation of the nature of things. This can be recognized from the results of the intellectual activities of Muslim scholars that had brought Islam into the pinnacles of human civilization. At this juncture, at this point of time, I would like to reiterate the fact that unlike Western worldview, as promoted, for example, by Kant, by Hegel, by Kierkegaard, by Delty, by Husserl, by Jaspers, by Heidegger, okay, the term worldview is unfortunately used without any precise definition. Now, in contrast with the Western thinkers, we will show how Muslim contemporary scholars, as well as the classical scholars, had consistently defended a single framework that entails the unity of knowledge. This is actually about how they maintain the concept of Tawheed. Now, in our previous discussion, we have argued that due to the vague, unclear understanding of the concept of reality and truth that defines the intellectual spectrum of naturalism, secularism, materialism, postmodernism, has in fact been responsible for corrupting social sciences and humanities. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, Sahran. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. Go back to the definition. Go back to the definition. That's it. Okay. Now, this definition. Now, to recapitulate what we have discussed in the previous classes, we have indicated how classical and contemporary Muslim philosopher Worldview have clearly defined Islamic Weltanzong as a set of beliefs about the fundamental aspect of reality, such as God, man, universe, life after death, and the relations that influence one perceiving, thinking, knowing, and doing. Such definition maintains the meaning of a certitude, yakin, that Islam has projected since its inception. Islamic Weltanzong is a theistic, God-centered, and ethical worldview that contrasts with the secularistic, materialistic, and postmodernistic worldview. Islamic worldview is a comprehensive study of the world, perception of the universe, philosophy of life, and I have mentioned all these kind of points. And another point is that Islamic worldview is a set of beliefs that life, existence came into being as a result of meaning to say desire and design of the Creator. Such view is totally the opposite of accidental from the perspective of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, which means our concept of Islamic worldview is a well-planned. It is the desire. It is the design of the Creator. Islamic worldview, as we clearly defined in the previous discussion, we have argued that it is a comprehensive conception of the universe and man's relation to it. The vision of the reality and truth that appears before one's mind's eye, revealing what existence is all about. Now, understanding the fundamental questions pertaining to the issues of God, the existence of the seen, the unseen, the alam shahada and the alam ghaib, the existence, the understanding of universe, life, khilafah, ethical values, standard norms, history, and sharia. Those are the things that the fundamental questions that Islamic worldview properly and systematically answered. Now, Islamic worldview is also a guidance for a balanced approach. The word here is a guidance for a balanced approach between worldly and akhirah. In which aspects of for example, the akhirah must be inextricably linked to those of the latter, in which the latter has ultimate and final significance, which means the most important aspect is the akhirah. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. This is about how Muslim define the concept of Islamic worldview. And this is quite very important to each and every one of us. Like, for example, the work of Said Qutb, the Tasawwur al-Islami, and he understand it in harmony with human nature as it originates from the creator, which means that articulation, deliberation of Islamic worldview has never been separated, has never been isolated from the human nature. Now, and because of that, the concept of Islamic worldview from the perspective of Said Qutb, he looked at al-haqiqa al-uluhiyah, or the reality of God, which manifests and reflects through the following realities. Now, we will be looking at this the following reality: the haqiqa al-kawniyah, al-haya al-amma, or the reality of the cosmos and life. Okay, that is the reality that the Islamic worldview is dealing with. The another hakika is the hakika al-insaniya, the reality of man. Now, the science of anthropology, sociology, and other social sciences, because of vague and unclear understanding about the reality of man, then it confuses the whole social sciences and humanities. Now, another important aspect that we are talking about when it comes to Islamic worldview is the haqiq al-haya, the reality of life. When you talk about reality of life, every life, for example, even the life of vegetation is a part and parcel of Islamic worldview. The life of the angels, the prophets, the righteous people, all these are actually being tackled in a very comprehensive manner by Islamic worldview. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, then we look at again when it comes to Islamic worldview, it must be regarded as an Islamic creed. Islamic creed, Islamic worldview is a creed. It's an ideology that is very much inspired by our belief system. And that belief system solves the mystery, the mystery of existence. So anything related to the different level of existence, then Islamic worldview provided us. And this is very crucial, very important in defining what Islamic philosophy is all about. Because if man is guided by his belief system, but in the reality, in his public domain, he is guided by another reality, another worldview, then you will see within him there is a contradiction, there is a conflict within him. So Islam doesn't want that to happen. Then the point number two is that Islamic worldview explain to man the secret of life and death, and answer three timeless questions: what is our origin, where we will go, where we were created at all. In fact, this belief is not an innovation of Islam. This must be clearly understood, that Islamic worldview is not actually an innovation created by man, created by intellect, independent from the truth, but rather, and also don't forget that Islamic worldview is not an invention of the prophets. In the case of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but rather it is a purified belief in which all the Prophet of Allah have brought to humanity from the very inception and until the end of the time. So another very important point here, I have to be I have to tell you very clearly that contemporary Muslim scholars were very much consistent in looking at worldview, and you will realize For example, from the definition of Abdul Hamid, Kamal Hassan, Nakib Alatas, Al-Parslan, Chuduri, and so on. What we can understand from this, number one, in the case of Abu Sulaiman, it talks about the perception. The idea when it comes to reality. When we talk about reality, it talks about God, universe, purpose of life, prophethood, man, society, hereafter, and so on and so forth, which are actually the opposite of other worldviews. Now, in the case of Kamal Hassan, again, very clear. He was talking about a comprehensive conception. The word comprehensive conception is repeated, which means when you talk about this comprehensive conception of the reality, and Prof. Kamal Hassan emphasized about the intellect and the senses. And of course, other scholars also emphasize the rule of intellect and senses. But in his definition, he underlined the concept of intellect and senses. Now, Sayyid Nakib Alatas, for example, the concept of vision of reality and truth. And that definition of the vision of the reality and truth, he is not only looking at the sociological way of defining, understanding the truth, but especially he emphasized about the important work of the classical ulama, the mutakallimun, the philosophers, and the group of Sufi, who understand the tradition in a very contemplative manner, or he emphasized about spirituality. And in fact, in today's world, spirituality is very much discussed, not only by Muslims, but even secular-minded scholars, like, for instance, they use secularized spirituality. Spirituality. Now, this is a kind of question why people, after the failure of secularism and others, why they are now moving towards spirituality. Now, I think that is the nature of man, that wherever he is, he will certainly be looking for the concept of God. Now, again, the concept of mental framework, mental attitude, the totality of the concept, or the technological activities developed by individual throughout his life. And that was the definition given by Al-Parslan, looking at human activities. And these human activities, the traditions of man and so on, which is actually the product of mental framework, mental attitude, and so on. Then until finally that kind of culture of knowledge system is developed. And again, the last point is about the definition given by Chaudhuri, which is actually he recapitulated what has been discussed by other scholars. So what I can say here is that unlike Western scholars, you will see the differences. There is no harmony, there is no integrity, but our definition, you survey different views of Muslim scholars. What they are talking about are the same thing. And because of that, next slide, please. Next slide. And okay, now this is actually what really amazed us of the characteristics of Islamic worldview, looking at, for example, metaphysics, theology, cosmology, anthropology, teleology, axiology, eschatology, and so on and so forth. You are familiar with the meaning of this term. Now, I have mentioned this quite some time ago when we look at Islamic worldview, how different sciences have been contained in the so-called Islamic tradition. Next slide, please. Now, the next slide is about the characteristics of Islamic worldview. the term Arabaniya, Tawhid, Thawabit, Shumul, Tawazun, Waqi'iyya, and Al-Ijabiyya. Now, what I can say from this point is that observers, non-Muslim, for example, when they criticize Islam and they encounter terms like this, the concept of Rabbaniya, Tawhid, and so on, then until finally they become more attached, more closely engaged with the discourse of Islam. And many of them were converted into Islam due to the unique implication of this concept. Like, for example, when you talk about the permanent realities, the thawabit, we are not talking about a term that within a span of 5 years, then it is going to be changed. We're going to be subjected by time and space. What you are talking about in Europe is not going to be relevant when you reach Malaysia. So that concept of permanence, of Islamic worldview had attracted people into the fold of Islam. And when we talk about balance, during the peak of extremism, the discourse, the narratives about extremism, and Muslims, we emphasize about the concept of wasatiyah. International Islamic University emphasized the concept of wasatiyah in order to contain the issue of this extremism and so on, that Islam is no room, there is no room for advancing a kind of discourse that lead to any form of extremism and so on. So Islam is talking about reality, about dynamism, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Now, again, the concept of divine origin, Arabaniya. When you talk about divine origin, what we mean is divinely revealed guidance originated from divine source and ordained by Allah with all its constituents and characteristics. Now, why do we need to return back to this concept in understanding what worldview is all about? We must understand that many aspects, for example, when it comes to religious duty, salat, saum, and so on, these are all divinely prescribed. And intellect has no rule in let us say, describing what is to be done in salat, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have already prescribed, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had demonstrated it, how to do it. So this is about the divinely revealed guidance. So Islamic worldview is based on that. Then the point number 2 is the concept of Rabb contextually means Lord for all creatures. Okay, and how do we understand this? We have to look at Rabb as the Khaliq, creator. And the moment you go to the concept of Khaliq, you will already see so many contradictions with secular understanding of evolution. Because the concept of Khaliq, the Allah is the owner, Al-Malik, Allah is the master, Al-Malik, Allah is the originator, the Mubdi, Allah is the carer, the subsister, Al-Qayyum, Allah is the sustainer, the nourisher, Al-Mughid, Allah is the cherisher, provider, Al-Razak, Allah is the grantor of security, and Allah is the protector, and Allah is the planner. Now, and there is no proper equivalent meaning in English for the concept of Rabb. Just like the concept of ad-din, when you define din as religion, then the holistic understanding, the comprehensive understanding of religion as understood by Islam will never be satisfied. So that's the concept. We cannot simply come up with Rabb means lordship. because Rab talks about Al-Khaliq, Al-Malik, Al-Qayyum, and so on and so forth, the 99 attributes. Now, Rabbaniya means lordship. Now, lordship here, we talk about cherishing, sustaining, bringing to maturity, and godliness. Okay, and all these are something that is lacking in other worldview. Next slide, please. Now, understanding the term Rab, okay, what do we mean here? Rab is the true and complete owner. Okay, he owns this, and why we have to understand this concept. After knowing that Allah is the complete owner, that Allah is the one who have the right to be obeyed, the one who nourishes and sustains, and this is what makes man responsible in order to uphold the meaning of justice. Now, in our final analysis of the concept, the doctrine of social justice, why until now organizations like, for example, United Nations have never achieved the concept of social justice, no matter how much they have tried their best in order to do that, because men who are running the program are denied of this understanding of the concept of Rabb. Okay, and because of that, this when you talk about Rabb, which means Tawheed of Allah in His action. Okay, in His action. So no other being can do the things He does. No one else can legislate, or no one has the right to be obeyed other than Allah. Then another dimension that I would like to share with you is the concept of tarbiyah, the concept of tarbiyah, which is also derived from the root, the same root meaning. And when we talk about tarbiyah, we should not limit into physical development, but rather tarbiyah, if you want to use the tarbiyah and equate it with the concept of ta'adib, adab, and so on and so forth, fine. But the concept here is how to transform individuals, how to transform the society as, the concept of takarrub. That kind of consciousness, the consciousness of the presence of Allah, so that perfection, excellence, the concept of ihsan is achieved within our time. And talking about present discourse on sustainability and the development, peace education, and so on, all this cannot be realized unless, as I said, concept of Rabb is properly understood, profoundly understood. Next point, please. Okay. Now, understanding the term. Okay. Again. Let me very briefly look at these points. Okay, what do we have here? Rob conveys the idea of fostering, bringing to maturity. Then point number 2, Allah's lordship encompasses everything, and so on. So this concept of bringing humanity to maturity by way of test, by way of trials, by way of tribulations. Not many of us are actually have fully internalized this concept. We are now in this period of pandemic. We have been tested. This is a test. This is a trials. These are tribulations of man's life, and it creates a kind of history. Okay, it gives you a clearer understanding of what life is all about, of what the culture is all about, of what civilization is all about. Moving on, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, looking at again the oneness of Allah, I'm talking about here the concept of Tawheed. And I want to zoom in our discussion that we have to understand the concept of Tawheed, because later on I will be examining what are the implications of Tawheed in man's life, in the society and the civilization. So I want to use the concept of Tawheed. And when you talk about Tawheed, what we exactly mean is the absolute and uncompromising oneness of Allah. And this Tawheed is the central creed, the core of Islam, the bedrock of Islam, the bedrock of Islamic belief. The La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah. Then we define here the concept of God, that there is no worthy of worship, veneration, obedience except the one true God, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, whatever that goes on the cosmos, this is very important to understand, because when we examine secularism, especially when they talk about happiness, when they talk about prosperity, spirituality, and so on. So they will say, talk about spirituality. As long as you don't include God in your spirituality, is fine. So what type of spirituality that they are talking about? What type of happiness that they are talking about? So this is very clear, very crucial to all of us, because nowadays people are talking about happiness, peace, preservation of the environment, and so on and so forth. Like, for instance, the SDG. We have 17 goals. And some people are suggesting that we have to add another goals, and that is the number 18. And people, intellectuals from different universities giving the idea that spirituality, morality, ethics must be added into the SDG as understood by UNDP. Now, of course, it is clearly understood by this group of scholars that the 17 SDG, in order to make it more comprehensive from our perspective, is that the concept of spirituality, ethics, and so on must be embedded in every goals. Okay, in every goals. That's how we understand it. Okay, now. So what I'm trying to see here is that whatever goes to the cosmos, the heaven and the earth, everything between them resound with the signs pointing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or pointing to the Tawheed. So what is actually the vision, what is actually the end of Islamic worldview is towards the realization of the Tawheed in different levels. So Islamic will Tansong reverse, or we call it worship Allah. Okay, and everybody knows that. Who is this Allah? He is omnipotent, omnipresent, sustainer. Okay, He is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and so on. Who gives rain, who gives life, and so on. Now, the principle of Tawheed lays the foundation of Islamic social order. This is important when you talk about how it lays Islamic social order, and that man, his socio-economic activities must be guided based on those principles. Okay, and next slide, please. Okay, now moving on the Thabut. On the permanent aspect, on the thubut of Islam, I see we have 2 points that we need to understand. Islam is a true religion. With Allah is Allah mentioned that the only accepted religion is Al-Islam. And point number 2 is the concept of al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum, telling us that everything has been completed. Now, referring to this ayah, what we can understand, the only worldview that is going to be accepted in the sight of Allah is Islamic worldview. Number two, when you talk about perfection of our religion, then you don't have to search here and there, but rather you have to clearly understand that what is contained in the Quran, okay, is already completed, and what you need is to clearly understand it with the aid, with the help of available sciences. And the sciences can be found in different culture and different civilization. So what I am trying to mention here is the importance of civilizational interaction with the others, and exactly what happened during the pinnacle zenith of Islamic civilization. They did not close the ijtihad. They did not close the Islamic community, the Muslim scholars with other civilization, but they established understanding with the others. So that is quite crucial when you talk about this principle. But but at the same time, they uphold the permanent aspect, you know. Although they were engaged in the interpretation of, for instance, the Greek philosophy, but Muslims, how they protected the permanent dimension of Islamic worldview is really amazing, because during the time, rationalism, as understood by Muslims during the time, especially in the Mu'tazilah period, then eventually, because of the lean towards extremist dimension of rationality, until finally Muslims were saved by a kind of discourse that addresses the issue of extremism when it comes to rationality. So permanent aspect has been maintained during that time. Then the concept of next slide, please. The concept of shumul, okay, the shumul, yes. I have two important points here. Islam is a message for all time, for the entire humanity, and for all aspects of life. Now, Islam is for all the time, for the entire humanity. It's not an exclusivist worldview, but it is meant for everybody and for all aspects of life. It's not only confined to spirituality, but Islam is definitely crucial, relevant when it comes to economics, politics, and so on and so forth. It is comprehensive because you can appreciate it, you can recognize it when it comes to Aqidah, Ibadah, and Sharia. Now, looking at, for instance, the comprehensiveness of the Aqidah of Islam, the Ibadah and the Sharia, I want to just to make our discussion short when it comes to the Sharia, and looking at Sharia from legal point of view. Sharia is not just a civil law, but it deals also with personal laws, and even the case of muamalat and so on. This tells us that Islam is indeed comprehensive. Next slide, please. And the concept of tawazun, why tawazun needs to be we need to bring this tawazun in our discourse today. Now, I think the diagram that I had provided with you will give you a glimpse of what tawazun is all about from the perspective of Islam. Now, Islam, from biological point of view, you see Look at yourself, for instance. Look at the universe. Everything that Allah has created is based on the concept of balance. When He created the sun, I mean the night, He created the day. Even when it comes, you look at the the design of your body, how Allah created such kind of a wonderful balance that is manifested, reflected in the design of our human body. So from that perspective, we can say the religion of Islam is indeed based on the concept of tawazun. Now, how to do that? How to understand? Let me look at important points like concept of shahada, alam shahada, and alam ghaib. This point, alam shahada, what we mean is the physical universe, the micro and the macrocosm, the humans, the flora, the fauna, the inanimate objects. And alam ghaib refers to the unseen universe, even when it comes to the arsh. The words of the angels, the heaven, the hell, the jinn, and the satan, and the unseen creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what is then the point? Okay, how to attain the concept of wasatiyah? How to attain the concept of wasatiyah? Definitely, first of all, you have to deal with the right aqidah. Then the right aqidah, then the Islamic, the norms of Islam, the Sharia, the Islamic norm must be understood. Then the concept of ibadah, worship, the servitude, how we make ourselves as the Khalifa, the abd. Then the concept of akhlaq, the ethics and morality. Then at the same time, the concept of amal. Now, looking at these terms, aqidah, sharia, ibadah, akhlaq, and amal, in comparison with other system of belief, I would say Islamic understanding of balance is indeed very comprehensive, because now you take out, for example, one of these aspects, for instance, ethics. You take it out from the cycle. What would happen? The entire narrative of Islam will become incomplete. And that would give a big problem to the entire system. So we have to make sure that all these concepts are profoundly understood by all the believers. And of course, to coexist with the other group of people, we have to share with them this understanding. Because this is something lacking in the contemporary Islamic thought and philosophy. Okay, then. Next slide, please. Okay. What do I have here? Okay. It is the realism, the practicality. Okay. I want to look at two important points. The 2 points here to make our discussion simple, and this is in relation also with the question of one brother talking about methodological naturalism and materialism, something about that, dealing about the problem of methodology and so on and so forth. Now, in Islam, when it comes to methodology, we have to clearly understand that whatever methodology that you are promoting, then it has to be based on two principles. Number one is the usul. Okay, this usul in Islam is something unchangeable. Okay, unchangeable. All the development and changes must be within the framework of these permanent realities. When you talk about permanent realities, for example, the concept of God, how God is understood, how the angels, how the prophethood, nubuwwah, and so on, how it is understood, then that must be maintained throughout the time. Okay, and the methodology that is being developed in the different periods must be based on that usul. Okay, like for example, looking at the different mazahib. Although there are differences of approaches among the mazhab, but you can see that the legal framework, the legal framework of the four mazhab are actually based on the same fundamentals. Now, the next point, when it comes to the practical dimension of Islamic worldview, is when it comes to the furu, the furu. Now, when you talk about furu, looking at, for example, that we have to consider realities and circumstances. Now, talking about considering realities and circumstances, what does it mean? So, Muslim scholars, the true scholars of Islam, must be able to have a good command of the realities. When you talk about realities as sociologists and anthropologists, you're talking about man's reality, social realities. Okay, social scientists must have a good command of what is happening, and they are able to contextualize. Now, contextualization here doesn't mean that, okay, the way you contextualize today will be totally irrelevant in the future. But rather, of course, most probably you are facing the different problems in a different period of time, and how you contextualize this might give a kind of different picture of what Islam is all about. And that's the reason why secularists, especially the colonialist officials, when the British came to Malaysia, when the Americans came to Philippines, the Dutch came to Philippines, they brought with them such anthropologists. And when they returned back to their respective countries, and the way they describe these three countries, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia, then people in Europe, US and Europe, understand Islam in a different perspective, as if Islam have different versions. And this is actually the problem of how they interpreted social realities. But in Islam, although Muslims are asked to interpret the realities, the practical dimension of Islam, but we have to understand the furu at the same time, the usul as well as a total harmony with the furu. Okay, next slide, please. The next slide. Then what I can say here is about the practical dimension of Islamic worldview can also be reflected in the concept of Aqidah and the practical ibadah and so on and so forth. Okay, just want to look at, for instance, the practical ibadah. When it comes to the salah, the siyam, the zakah, and so on, all this, there is no doubt that what is in the salah is not something about 50 times of salat. When the Prophet Muhammad went for Isra wal Mi'raj, and Nabi Musa asked Prophet Muhammad to return back to Allah and to reduce the number of prayers, because he knows for sure that the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad will not be able to fulfill the 50 prayer in a day. So Allah had given us 5 daily prayers, and that is very much possible. The zakat, for instance, the 2.5%, which is the amount of money that is kept by you, and actually that it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the 8 beneficiaries as defined by Quran. And all these are very, very practical and so on. So meaning, what are the frameworks of our shall I say, obligations? religious obligation, social obligation, and so on, especially when it comes to religious obligation. It is done daily, weekly, yearly, or maybe once in a lifetime, like in the case of pilgrimage. Next slide, please. And the next one, the next slide, again, when it comes to akhlaq, practical sharia, and so on. Okay, that is quite clear. Then the next one is the dynamism, al-ijabiyah. Okay, what do we mean by dynamism? Why Islamic worldview is a dynamic thing? Because what we are trying to mention here is, in addition to relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Islamic worldview greatly emphasize about habl minal, of course, min Allah, then habl minan nas, the social relationship. Now, that particular social relationship, how to interact with people, and the success of such kind of interaction is determined by your relationship with God. So again, the concept of spirituality here comes into picture, that what is happening when it comes to relationship between man, why such kind of relationship have never been fully understood. It is because of the habl min Allah is something is being cut off, is not reflected in our education system, in our economic system, the political system, until finally what is going on when it comes to relationship, then we come up with a very problematic relationship. Like, for example, I just would like to share with you our experience in the case of the Philippines. Many of you have read what exactly happened in the southern Philippines. The government come up with autonomous region. I mean, giving autonomy to the Muslims, and the autonomous government was run for several decades until finally after studying the system, then the government had to say it is a failure experiment of the government in handling solving the problem of people in the South. Now, why it is a failure experiment of the government? It's a failure project of the government when it comes to social integration. Now, why it is a failure? And my simple analysis in relation to our discussion of today is because of the lacking of dynamism in the system. And that dynamism, as I mentioned here, is due to what? Vague understanding of the concept of habl min Allah wa habl minan nas. Okay, let's proceed with the next slide, please, brother. Okay, I think I'm rushing actually because I'm afraid that I may not reach this slide because I was late for more than 10 minutes, and I have to stop here. And next meeting, our discussion will be concept of Tawheed, concept of man and universe, the implication of Tawheed for thought and life. Okay, that will be the main discussion by next meeting. I hope in this discussion I have make the points simplified, and I hope you have understood what I've been trying to mention here and discuss here. Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's on time because we start 9:45, so we We stopped
And
before 10:40. So
yes,
about
yes.
50
So
minutes.
okay, okay. So
Is there any question from chat do you want to take, or any question from the last time that you wanted to address? Gatali?
oh yes. Just uh, okay. Let me just want to reflect on Brother Nordin's question. He said there are people who differentiate between methodological and philosophical naturalism. Science must use methodological naturalism so as not to fall into magical explanation, astrology, alchemy, and the like. Okay, methodological naturalism does not have to fall into philosophical materialism, which is to believe that only nature exists. But in science, explanation must refer to natural causes. For them, Muslims should not be, he used the word, allergic to methodological naturalism. Now, Brother Nordin, in order to address your problem, I mean your question, we are looking at here whether or not we have to conform or to follow methodological framework as understood by naturalism. Now, you see, look, some Muslim scholars, there is no doubt that many of them uh, uh, joined the group of Charles Darwin's concept of evolution, looking at from uh, from the different processes, which is supported by a scientific explanation. So of course, not every aspect of those processes can be 100% be disregarded, because there are positive aspects of those methodological scientific explanation of what is happening. For example, when it comes to vegetation, when it comes to um, uh, other creations. From the perspective of this methodological naturalism, I would say, we cannot simply say no to it. But the point here is when you talk about understanding the substance, the concept of materialism as understood by naturalism, talking about the substance, and because this substance, the concept of matter, and how they understand this matter, until finally, when the matter substitute what we mean, al-Khaliq, as I mentioned, the one who creates. And if Khalik is understood from that concept of matter as understood by them, the materialism, then we are going to create a problem. Okay, this is the point. And another issue that I think the sister was talking about, there are people, academics, he mentioned about some academics defended Stalin's position. I was talking about why Stalin can kill 200 million people. I still remember my discussion before. And what was the justification of Stalin of killing, bringing, and we argue that such kind of incident was not done overnight, but it is a product of idea. It's a product of idea. That's the reason why in postmodernism they wanted to stop the Second World War and so on, coming up with an alternative discourse to really address the problem that had brought a total destruction in the world. First the major world war, and that was brought by that idea. So as a result of that, uh, although there were many people who defended such idea, like for example, this collateral damage that people are talking about today. In every word, there must be a collateral damage. Then after the damage, then you have to rehabilitate. Like for example, our president, Rodrigo Duterte, what he had done to Marawi City. So you see, when there was a presence of the ISIS in the city, and it's less than 200 of them, or maybe more than 200 of them. We are not so sure what is the exact number of the ISIS who occupy the city. And there was a kind of exchange of fire between the ISIS group and the military. Then what happened? The third day, the president of the Republic of the Philippines declared martial law in the country, and after that he started bombing the whole city. For how many months? 5 continuous months that there is no single day that there was no bombing in the city of Marawi. And after 5 months, the whole city literally been flattened. Now, to him, it's all right. It's all right. The whole, few hundred thousands of people fled. Okay. Then after that, now already furious that the city was not rehabilitated. There is no proper rehabilitation. People are still living in this refugee. I call it tent. This tent, or maybe this kind of temporary shelters. Now, is that the way that man should change the society, inflicting sufferance to people? And I think not unless the concept of rob is felt in the heart, okay, then the world will not become a peaceful place. Okay, so that's the reason why, even when it comes to secular humanism, they bring the concept of secularized spirituality. Although, okay, they want to feel spirituality, but spirituality without God. Okay, happiness without God. But at least now there is a move towards that kind of higher objective that the entire humanity is aspiring for several decades. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, for your answering the question from the last session. In the chat, there is another question, but we will send to you and you can answer it next.
Okay, can you send it to my WhatsApp?
Okay.
Sazwan?
Okay, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I thank you very much to all the participants and Dr. Ali. We will meet again next week. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam.